Hello everybody, how's everybody doing today? So I'm in Beijing. It's my third day in Beijing. I leave on Tuesday and I decided to visit the Forbidden City or Palace Museum is another name that it's titled. And I saw that they had a ceramics gallery and I was like, oh my gosh, let me go and see it. Initially I wasn't thinking about doing like a long form video for it, but I was like, let me do a video and show y'all, like, when else are you gonna see ceramic gallery in Forbidden City? So we're just gonna check it out. It actually took me a bit of a minute to find this place. Like, it's kind of, this place is pretty big. I was walking around back and forth. Somebody sent me one way, somebody sent me the other way. My little like tour thing sent me a whole other way, but whatever. I finally made it here, so let's go check it out. The Forbidden City is a 90 neighborhood, 9,000 roomed imperial palace complex located in the capital of China, Beijing. It was home to 24 Chinese emperors from 1421 to 1911. After the final emperor Puyi was expelled during the Chinese Revolution, the Forbidden City was transformed into the Palace Museum, where compounds are now maintained and imperial artifacts are hosted in galleries to be displayed. Isn't it so wild how a place that was once closed off to most common people and foreigners is now open and a place to be enjoyed by many, including me, a foreigner? I just find that so crazy. And now, among the galleries that I mentioned, one of them happens to be a ceramics gallery. And if you haven't noticed by now, this is indeed a ceramics channel, so that's what we'll be looking at today: ceramics. China is one of the earliest known producers and users of pottery, with ceramic craftsmanship in the country dating as far back as 20 years ago. Proto-porcelains were first made in the Xia and Shang dynasties before developing into the robust porcelain that we are familiar with today during around the Eastern Han dynasty. From what I've read, proto-porcelains, ooh, that's a tongue twister. Proto-porcelains are kind of like a grayish ware. It's still a high fire clay body like porcelain, but it lacks some of the integral qualities of a true porcelain. Over time, a prefecture named Jingzhen became synonymous to ceramics in China, and in the prefecture, ceramic development flourished. If you saw my Yichang Ceramics Village video, I think Jingzhen could be akin to Yichang Ceramics Village, except the prefecture of Jingzhen was at a much more greater scale than what we saw at Yichang Ceramic Village. Ceramics hold a significant position in Chinese culture. I'll break it down like this. In Chinese history, emperors were seen as divine beings chosen by God. Both his subjects and the emperor believed himself to be the son of the gods. And during an emperor's divine rule, ceramics were a key tool used to exemplify this prestige and power. I'll talk about this a little more a little later, but to add some more perspective, of the 1.86 million relics and items in the Forbidden City, 360,000 of those are ceramics. You know, when I record these videos, I know that I want to share with you all what I see. I'm like running around taking videos, pictures, and clips of everything. But as I sat down and I'm looking at the footage that I have, I'm thinking to myself like, how do I want to show this to you all? How do I want to present this to you all? And I decided that I would share with you all the themes and the phenomena that I noticed as I was observing in the present, as well as how I process the things that I observed later on. And after some time, I finally narrowed down these observations and thoughts into 4 particular themes that I noticed that I wanted to share with you all. And those 4 themes being tradition, intricacy and detail, craftsmanship, and storytelling. So without further ado, let's get into it. When I think about tradition, I often think of ceremony and ritual. I feel like even our most mundane tasks that we do on a day-to-day can be seen as ritualistic. And I think as we look back in time, rituals and the circumstances around them intensify because we have phenomena that aren't explained. And as people, we need some type of peace to alleviate the things that we do not know. And then we also add levels of spiritualism to this. And as I've mentioned, if you can pick up, there's a lot of spiritualism in Chinese history, as well as the ceremonies and rituals to accompany them. And in these ceremonies and rituals, I think ceramics were held to a high regard and a necessity in carrying out these ceremonies. The major variant of porcelain that was developed during the Three Kings period, the Jin dynasty, and the Southern and Northern dynasty was a celadon glazed porcelain, and there was some black glazed porcelain as well. And both these celadon and black glazed porcelain pieces were often used for burial ceremonies. And as we look at imperial sacrificial ceremonies, although once performed with gold wares, by the time of the Ming Dynasty, it was mandated that imperial sacrificial ceremonies be held with porcelain vessels. As I mentioned previously, emperors were seen as divine beings, and these ceremonies were considered as his divine duties to solidify his position bestowed upon him. So I feel like these mandates demonstrate just how close of a divine entity pottery and ceramics were regarded in the country's history. Now let's get into intricacy and detail. Intricacy and detail are no stranger to Chinese craftsmanship, and it can be recognized in architecture and art throughout the country's history, and ceramics is no exception to this history. I feel like in this day and age of minimalism, where detail and intricacy is stricken from our day-to-day lives by the second, I think when you come to a place like China, you see these ancient artifacts and you see the architecture, you really get this heightened appreciation for intention, attention, detail, intricacy. You take it all in. And as I mentioned that we're seeing a decline in detail, of course I'm speaking from a Western perspective and what I'm seeing in the Western world of design, but something that I found interesting was that as you look at Chinese ceramics over time, there are areas in the timeline where it almost seems like there's a decline in detail, but then when you look closer, you see that the attention of detail is shifted to a different area of the ceramic piece. When we see the older pieces that were displayed in the museum that were created before even the development of proto-porcelains, we see an emphasis on pattern and painted pattern. I think painting was the first ways of adding decoration to a piece. But I feel like as we move into that proto-porcelain era and there's more development to glazes and we get this celadon glazed pieces, we see less of these patterns and it almost looks like less detail. But when you pay attention, you see that people are focusing on development and chemistry of these glazes. And then even when you look at these celadons, you see these beautiful little tiny crackles when you look closely. And then you also see this emphasis on texture in the pieces. So I feel like you really just get to see how people, as artists, you may know, like your mind just kind of bounces around and shifts and you get hyper fixated on one thing and bounce to another thing. So I think that was really interesting to see within the pieces. And I appreciate that you can see this because the pieces are displayed in a chronological order. And I think this supports being able to tie these ideas together. I also noticed that drawn or painted detail and intricacy begins to reaccelerate in Chinese ceramics around the late Ming and early Qing dynasty. During the rule of Emperor Kangxi, there were efforts to revitalize imperial kilns at Ningzhen that had been destroyed during political rebellion. During this revitalization, we see a rise in blue and white ceramics as a decorative technique of Feng Shui builds popularity and increased focus on precision in drawing. We also see this introduction of a larger variety of color. We really get to see this relationship between precise detail and color continue to develop in ceramic works throughout the Qing dynasty. We spent time talking about the object of ceramics. I think it's fine time we shift into the craftsmanship behind ceramics. And really when I speak on the craftsmanship, I'm really speaking of the craftsmen, the people behind these works. When I thought about what high regard ceramics were held in these past dynasties, I wondered how regarded the potters and ceramicists of the time were. I wondered to myself, how rigorous are the requirements and the studies that go into becoming a potter of the royal court? I thought of what I knew about Chinese pottery today. I don't know about y'all, but I have found myself caught on the brink of a multiple video binge watching session of long TikToks of people meticulously crafting Yijing Jisha teapots. From what I've learned from binge watching and reading into those teapots, today in order to become a senior Yijing Jisha teapot master, one has to have a bachelor's degree, at least 25 years of pottery work experience, and multiple gold, not silver, not bronze, gold medal awards to become a Jisha master. But at the end of that journey in becoming a Jisha master, one can command thousands of dollars for a single teapot. With all this in mind, I can only imagine how rigorous it would be to become a ceramicist of the royal court. Like, I mean, you are serving what people regarded as the son of God. So I felt like the coursework would be rigorous, but the reward would be just as bountiful. But I was half surprised, half not surprised to learn that potters of the royal court were just seen as regular workers and just needed to demonstrate some kind of multiple skill sets. Ceramics at the time weren't viewed as arts in the same light as maybe painting or calligraphy. Potters were even looked down upon by imperial court members and couldn't even dare think about marking their own work. It was seen as like, how dare you, such a lowly being, even think about marking such a divine object? It's always crazy to think about how behind so many sought after commodities and renowned architectural bodies are the forgotten literal human bodies and skilled laborers who made it happen. It's wild to think that during such a time where ceramics are viewed as almost akin to divinity, but when you look at the people who make them, you view them as just low-born peasants. Well, that got a little deep. Sorry about that, y'all, but it needed to be said. But perhaps you guys might want to take a little break, get a little snack, and we can get back to admiring the works created by these great craftsmen. If you really took your little break, welcome back. I hope your break was good. But the last theme I want to touch on was the storytelling that I observed in the ceramic pieces in the Forbidden City. What was interesting to me is how the pieces told both a literal and figurative story of the country's anthropology. I think it allowed us to see this juxtaposition between imagination and reality. With the paintings and artwork on these ceramic pieces, we get quite intentional storytelling. We get storytelling in a literal sense, as these paintings draw stories about people, places, customs, and the spirituality that make up the country's history. I think it's also interesting that behind the scene, behind the glaze, there's also a story being told of the real world and how that real world is influencing the development of craft and the art of ceramics. I found that when I took a closer look at ceramic trends in the history of China, I would often find political shifts and turmoil taking place simultaneously and oftentimes leading such trends. I mentioned earlier how ceramics can often exemplify an emperor's power and prestige. I think this is really well demonstrated, and how when there are these revolutions and shifts in power, there are attacks on the ceramic industry. And I feel like, to me, it almost looks as if an attack on the emperor himself. For example, when we see the spread of celadon throughout the country, we can trace it back to craftsmen of the northern Song court fleeing to the south as courts lost control due to the Jin Song Wars of the 1120s. Or when we see a change in leadership and revitalization of ceramics, we feel an emperor leave his mark through the aesthetic and the praise of the ceramics formed during his reign. I think a really good example of this is the revitalization of ceramics during Emperor Kangxi's reign that I mentioned in the intricacy and detail section of the video. Now, I've spoken to the real-world political and power shifts these ceramic works can lead us to, but I've also noticed that I think they can lead us to some social and economic shifts as well. Something I noticed was ceramic works were often said to be on a decline during post-political revolt and turbulent times, and simultaneously, as the ceramic industry rebuilds itself in these post-turmoil times, highly regarded ceramics became more accessible to the people. For example, after imperial kilns were destroyed, private practices began to emerge, and the imperial court had less control of what was produced and who can have it. Yes, I feel like the courts had its say, but to a business person, making money will always prevail. So if it entails selling to non-imperial people that were willing to buy these pieces, I cannot see that being stopped, even if the imperial court really wanted to. Because think about it, there are so many things in this world that should not be sold but still are. So it makes me wonder if the ceramic declines spoken of were truly declines in quality, or if this was just an act of classism and the upper class was voicing their disdain for common people having increasing accessibility to these once profound goods. I mean, we even see these same type of occurrences happen today when people who quote unquote should not be able to afford a particular luxury suddenly begin to gain access to said luxury. Those who once got to wave these luxuries as symbols of status become vocal about their disdain for this newfound access. And then, of course, they frolic off to move the goalposts as what allows someone to be seen as a certain status.
Well, I could be reaching. I don't know. Maybe I've just jabbered away at your ear for the past few minutes. But nonetheless, those were my observations and thoughts as I went through the museum in present time and as I reflected upon my experiences. I really enjoyed my time seeing all these pieces, not just in China, but as I've been traveling abroad. I think it really adds to my perspective as a creative, not just in my ceramic works, but I think in my other crafts as well. I'm really grateful for it. Also, if you have any other information you want to add in or any gaps that you want to fill in, feel free to drop it in the comments.
Well, what did you all think? Now you've seen the pottery and ceramics at the Forbidden Palace. There's so many pretty shapes. Oh my gosh. I was like, where to look, what to take photos of. It was a lot. I pretty much have not seen really the rest of the palace because I spent half the time looking for the ceramics gallery. So now I'm going to try to run through for the last 40 minutes that's open. But yeah, thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe. Also, make a note of what pieces you like the best. Let me know. But that's it, y'all. Bye.